Not if you have a Bible this morning. I'd like to ask you to turn to the book of Philemon, and also like to ask you to turn to the book of Colossians. So kind of put your finger on both of those, and we're going to look at both of those places. And as we were singing and I was meditating upon just what I might speak about here in a few moments, and this is where I think our song service has been so valuable, is it really directed my thoughts towards how Jesus is a perfect example of what I'm going to talk about today. So much of our music was lifting up Jesus today. And today, I'd like to talk about desirable friends. Desirable friends. And Jesus has been a wonderful friend to me. If you don't know him today, frankly, you have no idea what I'm talking about. If he is an accessory in your life and you're saved, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But if you're trying to live your life for the Lord, you know that there is a strange, some would call it strange, I think it should be normal, I guess, ongoing conversation you have with him all the time. All the time. I laugh with the Lord. I do. I laugh with the Lord. I'll do something stupid or I'll hear something stupid and he's always there. And I just laugh and I think, Lord, you just saw that. I don't want anybody else to see that. I'm glad they didn't. But you did. When I get in the depth of sorrow and loneliness, I'm never alone, ever. And I talk to him. Driving, I sing to the Lord. I wake up in the middle of the night, and in that half-awake state, I just kind of mutter things to him. Things that I know in the morning I probably won't even remember. And I just whisper in my heart things. This week, at one occasion at Old Union School, and some of Ashley's insistence this week about remembering them came to my mind in just the middle of the night in that half-awake state, and I just kind of said, Lord, this isn't much, but please attend to their needs. When I am in need of wisdom, and he's always there. He's just ever present in a time of trouble. And so as we talk about our thoughts today, I can say that I have at least one friend who meets these descriptions, and that's Jesus. Now for me, that idea is especially personal because whenever I was saved, the song that was the Lord used to very much prompt me towards him was What a Friend We Have in Jesus. And my family had been abruptly moved away from our elementary school. I never got to say goodbye to my best friend, James. And that kind of haunted me as a kid for months and months and months. And I searched for a friend where we lived, the new place that we lived, and just couldn't find somebody quite like James in my mind. And the Lord used my need of a friend to prompt me to him. It's like it all at once came together that I was wanting James back, but that what God was offering my little 10-year-old heart was a friend much greater than a kid named James. That's what was going on in my heart when I was on the altar, is Some people can tell you what they were thinking and, the things they were saying. And for me, it was just this knowledge. It was just this desire, just this very deep desire for a friend. And October 6, 1998, I met the Lord. And He has promised me that He would be with me until the end. That's a wonderful thing that I've grown to appreciate. People, as you grow older, you realize there are seasons of life. And you can have somebody who's a best friend. And you think, how could I ever live without him? And then the season of life changes. And the next thing you know, it is a distant memory. And then nature takes its course, and those people who are your friends, they get sick and they die. But God has promised something that He alone can promise. I will be with you until the end. And I think of a dear friend that I had, and I watched him on his deathbed, and his friend was with him until the very end. And that caused me to appreciate that same friend who didn't forsake him has promised he would never forsake me. And as we read some things this morning and we discuss some things, if the Lord would help us to do so, I want to publicly give God thanks that He is that way to me. I'm a pretty poor friend back, if I'm being honest with you. And I don't say that in a shallow way, I mean it. I'm a pretty poor friend in return. But my lack, He never uses as an excuse to forsake me. Isn't that what we do sometimes with each other? We feel mistreated by each other and we use that as a reason, the lacking in the other person, to maybe not treat them quite as well. God doesn't do that to you, ever. Ever. He's going to love you until the end. And I praise Him this morning for that. Last week, and this morning, I feel very sure as I began to pour into this text, verses 4 through 9, I thought, yeah, I'll be able to get through this, and you all know better than that. I can turn anything into 2 hours, and so I'll try not to do that this morning. But I thought I should be able to encompass the main thoughts here in Philemon, and I don't know that I'll be able to do that, speaking about a friend, because there are some things that are discussed here about what a friend is. And I don't think, now, we're instructed through scriptures by prescription. So it's a direct command and it's very easy to perceive. Do this and don't do this. And then often, and I think often this requires an enlightenment of the Holy Spirit to show us this. We see something and it's not just prescribed. It's that God helps us to see something beyond what's prescribed. There's more to it. And I think the way that Paul speaks here to Philemon and the church at Colossae, he is showing himself to be a wonderful friend to them. And, I think for a large portion of my life, I underestimated the value of a good friend. But if the crux of our existence is about relationship, that's what it's about. Your relationship with God, ultimately, your relationship with your spouse and with your children, relationship with friends and acquaintances. The most sacred areas of your life are those of relationships. Friendships are an immense blessing that God has given to our race. We can have friends close-knit, tight people who know your heart, who can have access to deep parts of you, and thereby can help you and impute certain levels of joy and love and kind. There are certain things that only through the modem of friendship can our hearts experience some of the richness of this life. And I think there is a growing tendency today, because of fear, to keep people out and to be satisfied with shallow acquaintances. And I want to say, you may never get hurt if you do that, but you will forfeit far more than you could ever comprehend if you don't desire to have good friends. You may be happy in your selfishness, and people may not ruin all these little things that you like to line up to satisfy your flesh. But your spirit, in moments of spiritual awareness, it will be self-evident how lonely you really are. You'll be lonely. And you'll feel sorry for yourself, most likely. So I want to advocate this morning. If you've always had a defense mechanism up, if you've always been afraid, maybe you were a child, you had some friendships that hurt you, maybe you had some parents that hurt you, why don't you crack the door this morning to consider having a friend, a real friend? And I want to pose this morning in two different ways. I want you to, as we go into these thoughts, I want you to consider it from two different frameworks this morning. Consider what kind of a friend you would desire. Number one. Number two, think of somebody in particular that you want to be this type of friend to. So think for just a moment. Maybe you just got a distant acquaintance, but some of that friendship and relationship has been deepening. Maybe there's some curiosity that you have. Maybe there's somebody, and I'll tell you a good thing, that when I get around somebody and every time I leave their presence, I feel edified. I feel like it's been of value. That's a good place to start. Now, to remind you what's going on here in the text and why we're going to jump from Colossians back to Philemon, is that Paul is writing to this church which is in the house of this man Philemon. He lives in Colossae. Coming to him, Paul has sent a messenger to him, as well as this man named Onesimus, which was a slave. And so they have two letters in hand. One of the men had the letter to the church at Colossae, which is in the house. Onesimus is this runaway slave who was a slave of Philemon. He's evidently bringing this letter Paul is writing to Philemon. And so in some ways, it's important as we're reading this because both are going to be read out loud to the church there in Philemon's house. So we're going to see this significant overlap, especially in this introductory area of what Paul is talking about. There's a tremendous amount of overlap in the content. And so we're going to try to do that this morning. And one thing I want to point out to you today is when Paul's in prison here, it tells us, and I want to look here at the end of, let's go back to the book of Colossians chapter 2, look at verse 1. It says this, because it's going to give us more of the context. So what we're going to dive into for just a moment is a little bit of what you can imagine is going on here. Paul is writing this letter to the Colossians, the people in the house of Philemon, but we learn in chapter 2, verse 1 of Colossians, it says this, and I'm reading from the NASB. I told you I was going to do that last week this morning.
For I want you to know how great a struggle I have in your behalf and for those who are at Laodicea. Now listen to this. And for all of those who have not personally seen my face. First thing that we know, Paul personally knows Philemon. He's met him face to face. But the whole group of people that are meeting in his house are strangers to him. And this is going to be an important point. He does not know those people that he's writing to. Secondly, we learn this. Epaphras was a man, and I want to see if I can find this here real quick. Look at Colossians chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. Here's what it says. Because of the hope reserved for you in heaven, of which you previously heard in the word of truth, the gospel which has come to you, just as in all the world also it is bearing fruit and increasing, even as it has been doing in you also since the day you heard it, and understood the grace of God in truth, just as you learned it from Epaphras. Okay, so we've learned a second fact. Paul doesn't know these people, but Paul knows the man named Epaphras, who was the one who delivered the gospel to the church at Colossae. Then we find a final third point here about Epaphras in this. There's a point to all this. Look in the book of Philemon, chapter 1. It's the only chapter. Verse 23. Look at verse 23. As he's concluding, he says this. Epaphras, my fellow prisoner in Christ Jesus. Okay, so we're getting a little more of the picture. Paul's imprisoned. His partner, in other words, his friend, locked away with him in prison, is named Epaphras, who was the one who delivered the gospel to the Colossian church meeting in Philemon's house. Why is all this important? We're going to learn about Paul's behavior towards the church at Colossae and towards Philemon here in just a moment. And it's going to center on his prayer life for these people. And what I'm wanting to point out to you about this whole thing is that Paul is going to talk about him praying for them, but recognize they're a friend of a friend. He doesn't even personally know most of the people that he's talking about here, but look at how he treats these people because they're important to his friend. I'm going to come back and visit that here in just a moment. I want to look for just a minute, and I want to point out these two things to you about what he says in Philemon and what he says in Colossae, or in the Colossian letter. Look at Philemon chapter 1, verse 4, and notice the overlap here. It says this, I thank my God always, making mention of you in my prayers. Look at Colossians chapter 1, verse 9. It says this, Colossians 1 and 9. For this reason we also, since the day we heard about it, that was them receiving the gospel, have not ceased praying for you. Now, I think we have a very good comparison in our own church going on right now. We have a couple brothers who are burdened for a young group of Christians in a different country. And none of us know them. Me and maybe a few others know these people, but as they give reports and as they talk about their burden, we may hear some random names of people. And it'll be come back and reported to us about all these different people and things they're going through and how you view those people in Guatemala, the relationship that you have with them, that they are very personal and meaningful to brothers and sisters that we know here. People that we're very close to here have a deep longing in their heart in so much that they'll interrupt significant parts of their life to go be of service to those people and to edify those people. That's our touchstone to what Paul is talking about here with the people in Colossae. He does not personally know those people, but notice how he talks about them. Notice the way that he is trying to inspire their faith. He says, since the day that I heard you receive the gospel, every day I have not ceased to mention you in my prayers. I care about your faith. Now, I think there has been, and this is not in the form of a rebuke, this is just an acknowledgement. I think American missionary culture has been very distracting to true work of a missionary. Because what it has become the equivalent of is going to some third world country, taking some pictures, posting it on Instagram and saying, look, this trip changed my life. I feel bad that I'm wealthy and they're poor, and I'm going to feel bad for just a few months, and then I'm going to go right back to living my life the way I ought to. That is not a burden for biblical mission work. That's a Disney World trip cloaked in a mission trip. That's not what Paul's talking about here. And the burden that a missionary is called to have is not one that is just transient and based upon how well he is received on the other end. Well, we went somewhere and they really received us, and so now we want to go back again and we want to be involved more. No, true mission work is recognizing that Satan has a stronghold of darkness in a place where we don't live, and that God has deliberately called you to go be a source of light in a dark place, and that your job is going to be waging war, often in an isolated way, against the forces of darkness. It's a lonely place, it's a hard place, it's a painful place, insecurities and doubts and loneliness. Why is that important? Because what is the solution to loneliness? Friendship. Friendship is. Here, Paul is writing to this church. They're in their house. They're in a pagan culture. Listen to me this morning. Rome was a pagan culture. They were persecuting Christian people. And there's this young group of Christians in Colossae that are meeting in somebody's home. And they're connected, hear me, with another group of believers in a different city called Laodicea. And Paul had told them, I'm writing a letter to you. Make sure you share this letter with the Laodiceans. I've also written a letter to those at Laodicea. Make sure you read their letter. We don't have that in the scriptures, just so you know. There's not a book in the Bible written to them. And it's not talking about what John wrote in Revelation. That's something completely separate. He was advocating to them, be connected, be friends with one another in this labor and in this work. So I would challenge you this morning. Paul here is showing himself a friend to these complete strangers because he understands whether I know somebody or not, whether I understand all that's going on in a foreign culture or not, I want the gospel of Jesus Christ to flourish all over the world. And if there is somebody that I know that is laboring somewhere, by default, I love those people because he loves those people. We learned recently, Brother Matthew knows a baseball player that plays for the Reds, and just that connection, all of a sudden our whole house is a Reds fans. Because we care about things that our friend cares about, and we're inquisitive, we're curious about things, and that connection alone. But listen, that's just naturally speaking. What we're talking about is something spiritually deeper than that. And if we have brothers and sisters that, and this could be not just those afar, this could be your family members and people that you come and bear the burden for. Listen, if people come here and they're saying, I am burdened for this. I'm burdened for the school. You may be up in years, you may not have kids, grandkids that have any interest in going to school, never will go to the school. You may never darken the doors of the school. But since it matters to your sisters in Christ, it ought to matter to us. Why? Because love compels us to do something, listen to me, unnatural. It's not natural to the flesh. But I want to point out something else that Paul does. And I want to be gentle here because A, guilty, what I'm about to say, and B, I'm not trying to slave drive here, but I want to point something out. We have this terrible tendency sometimes in the absence of knowing what to say empty words. I'm praying for you. That's a commitment. That's a commitment you're making. Realize that. That's a commitment I'm making. And I have felt at times and had to repent of, Lord, I told somebody I was going to pray for them, and then next time I thought of it was when I saw them 6 months later. And I have a particular brother, he'll say to me sometimes, thank you for praying for me. I think, oh, that one hurts. I haven't been like I should. Notice Paul, and I want you to consider being on the receiving end of this, okay? If Paul was your friend and he was saying this to you. I always pray for you every day. Well, first of all, I would say that is a step up from what we typically hear in American Christian culture. Usually we just passively say, I'm praying for you. He's obviously adding some meaning to it. He's saying, since I heard about your faith, I never cease to pray for you. Now, given the things that Paul is holding in his hand, all the responsibility he has, for him to say, of all these things, I don't even know you, but I still remember you in prayer always. Quite a commitment. Not only does he say that to the Colossian church, which we read, he says it particularly to Philemon. I'm praying for you. Why? With leadership comes unique trials. It's unique trials in leadership. And they're meeting in his house. And so I think we can safely assume, because he knew Philemon, he knew the type of man that he was, because he knew Apphia, which was his wife, he's saying, I'm praying for you that you can keep these people together. But then he does something which I think is really at the heart of what a good friend does. He begins to tell them, here is what I'm praying for you. I want you to imagine you have a friend, and all your friends, all my friends, we all say to each other, I'm praying for you, I'm praying for you. And now imagine somebody was very serious and I'm praying for you. I pray for you every day, I pray for you. And here's what I'm praying for you. That's what Paul does. And you start hearing, now, let's back up for a second, because I don't want to be condemning of this, but I want to show you there's more. There's a deeper level here, okay? We often say that whenever it comes to difficult circumstances, and our direct prayers, if we tell somebody we're praying for them, is deliverance from those difficult circumstances. Very appropriate and necessary, but I'll say this, it's a pattern for what we ought to do with greater things. In other words, I want the school to be delivered out of this circumstance. But I want so much more for them. I want the character of those children to be fashioned after the likeness of Jesus Christ. I want them to be raised up a generation of missionaries and pastors and deacons and faithful members of their local congregations whose sole object is to praise and serve the Lord with their whole life. I want them to be saved and sanctified and become integral parts of God's community. Yes, pray for circumstance, but let's use that prayer as a pattern for something more. And that's not a rebuke of praying for the school at all. It just comes to mind as I'm talking about this here. So let's look at what Paul talks about in these verses here. Turn to Colossians chapter 1. Let's look at verse 9, and let's kind of bring out some of the things that he prays for. Now imagine your friend saying this to you, okay? I'm praying for you. I pray for you every day. And this is what I'm praying for you about. For this reason also, since the day we heard about it, have not ceased praying for you and asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. Okay, so the first thing, now, there are certain words in the scriptures and there are certain truths that I've just never been able to express very well, and this is one of them, okay? The Greek word is epigenosis, and it's translated often the word know, okay? But in our English language, it's deficient because what it implies is just you know somebody, you know something. You're aware of it mentally. And so very often the way that preachers will exegete this word before us is they'll make a distinction in salvation. You can't just say, I believe in the resurrection of Christ, that He died for my sins, so on and so forth, and I know I'm saved. It's more than a mental assent. It's a deep existential soul knowledge. There's no need of convincing. Does it include the mind? Absolutely. Does it include the heart and the emotions? Absolutely. But it's deeper than all of that, and it includes all of that. There is a deep sureness that when you're trying to explain to somebody the knowledge of how you know you're saved, there's a stopping point. I just can't tell you. I just know. I experience the sureness of it. When we're singing the songs of Zion and I'm worshiping the Lord, that's a reaffirmation that I know the Lord because there is something, a word of praise emanating from my spirit deeper than my mind and my emotions. That's one of the 1,000 ways that I know I've been saved is because my worship at times can be from a deeper part than just the human faculties. The word know here is talking about that. So hear me out. Very often, and many young people are going through this right now. You're seeking to know the will of the Lord. And what that likely revolves around, if we could deduce it, is just a yes-no question. This or this. And we're desperate to just, do I do this or that, Lord? That's what I want to know. That's all I need to know. That's not what it's talking about here, and I'll even contend that's not really what you need. You don't just need to know, do I turn right or left? Just so that you can continue to build whatever life that you think God's wanting you to, even if you're in a good intent with it. What he's talking about here is that there is a knowledge, there is a deep understanding, and you'll notice how he says it here, that you would have a knowledge filled with spiritual wisdom and understanding. You ever had something before I had this happen? Knowing I was supposed to pastor this church came this way, okay? I won't give you the whole context right now. I was really torn in my mind about something in revolves to that. Spent a few days of meditation and thought and just couldn't resolve it in my mind. Talked to Kathleen about it and I was trying to just search for something. One day, sitting in my office, thinking about just the question and just trying to solve the problem, I have no doubt that the Lord brought a thought to my heart, and instantly, beyond the mind, I knew exactly what we were supposed to do. I immediately went downstairs to Kathleen. I said, they haven't called yet. I haven't even talked to them yet. They haven't even called me to come for a tryout sermon. We need to begin to get our house ready to sell. Is it because I'm super spiritual? No. Is it because I have some Bible knowledge that just unlocked the key? No. Why? It's because the Holy Spirit imputed to me a knowledge deeper than just a head knowledge. That's what religion is missing today, and that's very often what we're missing whenever we're confused about life. Is that we're looking to I just want the trouble and distress of my mind to be over with. God wants more for you than that. And I'll say this, when you receive that, and your house, you begin to build your house upon that foundation, and the storms of life come, you never go back and waver, because that's sure. You know, if all it is a head knowledge, and I've gotten that at times, when hard times do come, you know what happens? You do begin to waver. Was that just my emotions telling me that? Was that just somebody talking me into it? That's why when you give counsel to people and when you receive counsel, realize what you're after from them is for them to just give you the answer. They can't do that. And even if they try, which a lot of people do, unfortunately, today, eventually it's going to come back to really harm your faith. Because you'll realize your faith is resting in them and not in the knowledge that God alone grants. He says for these people, I want you to be filled with the knowledge, the deep understanding through spiritual wisdom and understanding God's will for your life. What a good friend. What a good friend that Paul is to these people he doesn't even know. I am praying. What's given to you is a deep knowledge of the will of God for you and for your whole congregation. Let's keep going because he doesn't stop there. What else does he say? So why does he want them to be able to have this wisdom and this knowledge? You will walk, which just means live, in a manner worthy of the Lord to please him in all respects. I don't know about you, but when I don't know the will of the Lord, I am very uncertain in the steps that I take. So I would say this about this part of the verse. I can't walk confidently, directively, and with any sort of pace if I don't know the will of the Lord. Because the whole time what I'm wondering is this. Every step I take in this direction might cause me more trouble when God reveals that I'm supposed to be going in that direction. Right? And so when I'm walking unsure of where I'm supposed to go, I'm slow and I'm thinking and I'm maybe following other people and I lack confidence and I can't help other people along the way. I can't point people this direction because I don't even know where I'm supposed to be going. And so it causes me as I'm living my life to have a deep sense of insecurity that where I'm going is the right direction. And so as you're praying for your children, as you're praying for your family members, as you're praying for your friends, what a foundational prayer for us to pray for one another. Lord, grant a deep assurance in their spirit that what they're doing in your vineyard is exactly what they ought to be doing. So that when they are walking and living out their Christian life, they can do it with confidence and with assurance and with the full knowledge that their steps are ordered by the Lord. And that we would pray for one another. God, direct their steps. God, open their mouth. God, help create a character within them that when they begin to make relationships and try to influence people, guide their steps and give them confidence in the things that they're doing. Paul is praying for these strangers. God, guide their steps so that they can walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. What does that cause them to do? Well, the next part of the verse tells us, and it's an additional part of his prayer, bearing spiritual fruit. Look what it says here. To please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge, epignosis of God. Man, I tell you, that's one of the things that I pray for my kids, my 4 boys, all the time. All the time. Lord, I want them to be saved. And I wrestle with them that for a while. But I don't know that there's a prayer that escapes for their salvation that I can't pray for their fruitfulness. I want them to bear fruit. Bearing fruit is a beautiful thing. You know, it first of all, it praises the Creator. You ever look at a tree, it's just full of fruit. You know, the first thing it does, it just praises God because it's doing what it was created to do. I'm telling you, if you ever go look, you go look through the fields and you see healthy corn, healthy rows of corn, healthy garden, you realize because of God's design and because of the grace of the sun, and the water and all these things. Just the stalks standing there, just the fruit hanging on the tree, is that morning as the sun comes up, is lifting up its glistening praise to God because it's doing what it was designed to do. That's why when we partake of food, we before we even take a bite, we say, Lord, thank you that by this, the fruit, this food is producing, it's accomplishing what is your design. And I am a beneficiary of this food. Another way, how does it also do it? Why is Paul praying this? Because fruit provides to those in need. Why do I want to see people in Guatemala at the mission down there? I don't care if it's an extended arm from Mount Lebanon or anywhere. It doesn't matter at all to me. Why is it important to pray for those people? Well, because all around those people is just a city of darkness, of Catholicism. That's all it is. Just people's hearts who are essentially pagan is really what it is. Thinking prayers to Mary. Now imagine that. Imagine that you're a poor Hispanic blue-collar worker that lives in just a shanty or a shack. That's all you've ever known your whole life. Perhaps you're illiterate. And by the sweat of your brow, day and night, that's how you live and subsist. And circumstances come up in your life and your child is sick. And just like the movie that we showed you in there about Paul, how those pagans would go and they would offer their incense and they would burn incense and they would give offerings to Apollos and all those things. That's exactly what happens down there. They walk into this elaborate, beautiful, gold glistening building. They bow their knee and they give little offerings. And they're under the impression, well, maybe if I just give a little bit more, Mary or Joseph or some other god, demigod that they've exalted will intervene on their behalf and take care of their kid. And they do that week after week, month after month, year after year, generation after generation. That's their miserable existence spiritually. Why do I want the mission in Guatemala to succeed? Because it breaks my heart I can't go there. That's why. I feel that about everywhere. I literally do. I feel that way about everywhere. I hear about some war-torn country and people that worship some idols or are confused in Islam. You know, Iran, all I can think about in Iran. Well, all the big tectonic plates of politics and military and economics are happening. You know all I can think about? Spiritual darkness over the land. Uncertainty, pain, suffering. You know what they need? The light of the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what they need. Paul is saying, I want you to bear fruit. Why? Because I can't be there and we know the truth. You can't be there and we know the truth. So what do we want? Paul's imprisoned here. I want you to bear fruit so that all those people in darkness around you, I may never make it to Colossae. I'm expecting to, but I may never make it there. And if I don't make it there, I want you to be fruitful so that in the darkness, the light of Christ can be shown and strangers of strangers. Like you're a stranger to me, and I want people who are a stranger to you in your city to come to know the light of the glorious gospel and have a deep knowledge of assurance that they know Jesus Christ. Paul was praying for them to be fruitful. I'm not going to touch increasing in the knowledge of God. I feel like I need to move on to the next one real quickly. I wish I had more time. Strengthened with all power according to his glorious might. When you're young and healthy and life is going well, the prayer for strength doesn't make a lot of sense. It just doesn't. And I would say that your youth is blinding you, very much so. And I mean that with all due love and respect. You start out confident with physical strength, with mental acuity. All these things are just easy. But sometimes it takes decades and decades, and sometimes we never learn. There is not an ounce of spiritual lifting that can be done through the strength of the flesh. I mean, you can get everything perfectly set up. You can gather 1,000 people in a tent. You can be the most articulate preacher that's ever preached the gospel. You can know the scriptures and have the whole Bible memorized, and do nothing to move the heart of an individual. You can't. As you begin to get older and older, and you begin to pray and you begin to try through your own strength. Listen to me, when you try to move people's hearts, and then it fails miserably, and it often causes a lot of collateral damage, the more you try, the more you fail, the more you see it is not by strength, it's not by wisdom of man, the more you realize that Paul's prayer for this Colossian church is very, very well placed. God, give us strength to actually make a difference in this world. Because unless God gives us strength, you can nag your kids to death. And I bet some of you tried. And you know what it'll always be? Mom and Dad just nagging me again. That's all it'll be. Forever. That's all it'll be. Unless God gives you the strength in words. The power of His Spirit to speak in a manner and to a degree that only God can speak. You know what a good reminder for you is? When you keep trying to talk, and the more you talk, the further you're pushing people away. It should be a reminder to you, I'm depending upon my own strength. Maybe what I need to do, cut the talk in half and double the prayer. Praying for what? Lord, help my words or the words of anybody else. You know, I'll often have a once-in-a-lifetime encounter. Like I know I'm in some strange city, some strange place. I witnessed to somebody. I'm never going to see that person again, ever. And I'm kind of aware of it. I'll often pray, Lord, whoever they encounter down the path later, help that person. Help them to speak to the heart. Paul is praying for strength that the Colossian church would be effective. Last thing we'll hear here in Colossians is this. Why does he want them to have strength? I was going to talk a lot about this, that they would have perseverance and patience. Very often what we need in the creation, why do we need strength? Not to do something, but to persevere in doing something. Isn't that what probably tries your patience more than, or tries your heart more than anything else? It's not that you don't get up and say what needs to be said, it's that you don't have the patience to wait for God to cause it to grow. We want to give up. So much there I don't have time to talk about. Last one right there at the end of verse 11. Joyously giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. So here, he's not saying he is joyous. He is praying that they would be joyous. They would give thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. So he's praying for the Christian church. So notice the two prayers right next to each other. Strength for perseverance and patience. That implies hardship, right? You're not going to pray for somebody to have perseverance and patience if you don't know that whatever they're engaged in is going to be hard. But then following up that prayer for strength, that they might have perseverance and patience, he says this, I pray also that you would have joy. So I'm going to confess sin today. I don't live with enough joy. I mean, really. And the Lord's convicted me about that. Oh, the Bible teaches us that the spiritual things are a warfare. It's hard. That we're bearing burdens, that's true. But the Bible also teaches us that the man who bore the greatest burden served the Lord for the joy that was set before him. He was anticipating with eagerness and with hope. All of this suffering of faith is going to come to an end. And we're going to bask in endless joy. And so he prayed, allow them now, here and now, to think about, and this is what he's praying, the inheritance of their fathers that is legally and rightfully theirs. And that by that knowledge, they would here and now have strength and joy. Brother John testifying over here is an example of having joy. I'm just thankful and I'm happy. I'm joyous that God has granted us these things, that I'm saved, that I know Him, that I love all of you. That is an exercise of the gift, the spiritual fruit of joy. And listen to me, this journey is not meant to be all burdens, hardship, and sin. It is supposed to be littered with a lot of joy. And there are some people here this morning that if God has granted you a joyous disposition, don't put that light under a bushel, because your brothers and sisters, me included, can use a little joy. It doesn't come quite as natural to me to run with joy. And so if you feel that, if you have that in your spirit, that God has made you that way, maybe you'll never be a Sunday school teacher. Maybe you'll never hold a formal office. But maybe while all other people are running on fumes, doing those things, while they're conducting the work of the Lord, while they're going overseas, while they're doing all of those things, maybe their friendship with you will infect them with the sufficient joy for them to continue to bear the burdens they're bearing. And so maybe your burden is their sorrow. To bring joy to their sorrow, to bring words of encouragement, to say what Paul says here. Because I'll tell you this, if you were to come to me, if you were to come to somebody else and say, brother, all week long, I have thought about you, and I have been praying for you all week, and here's what I've been praying, that you would be strengthened in the burden that you're bearing, that you would be inspired to continue bearing fruit, that you would be, and list what Paul says here, and that you would have joy. Did you know instantly most of us would be infused with joy? Why? Because we have a true friend. And isn't that a wonderful thing? To know, man, this person loves and cares for me. I think this is an observation, not scriptural. This is just an experience observation. I think that's very often the role of older people whose bodies are breaking down. Really. You can't take a trip overseas. You can't do X, Y, Z that you once were able to do. But you know what you can do? Breathe this strength and joy and confidence into those who have the strength to do it in your stead. I remember one time Paul Bryson just called me out of nowhere. No reason. Many of you know Brother Paul. Many of you know that he lived with a lot of joy. Just this strange sense of humor, just this subtle way of just lifting you up. And he called me and said, I don't know why. I just want to let you know I've been praying for you. I thought, who in the world am I for you to pray for me? I'm glad you know my name, let alone my phone number, let alone bring me before the most important person in your life, which is the Lord. That was 10 years ago, 12 years ago. When I think about it, it still helps me. It still helps me to think that he would pray for me. This morning, I advocate to you because I think a church, and I haven't even gotten to what Philemon said about friendship. I won't be able to get to that today. That has friendships that abound like this. Man. We prayed for one another like this and exhorted each other like this and edified one another like this. And I'm not saying, that's not a negative statement. It's a optimistic, hopeful, forward-thinking one. I don't know that there's a limit to what good could be done in compounding prayer after prayer for one another in this fashion. And I think, in closing, that we would experience a form of love that none of us have ever felt before. If we began to just do this, we would experience a whole new realm of spiritual experience we probably have never experienced before to this degree. And maybe all those things that beset you right now, tendency towards melancholy, depression, anxiety, maybe, without you trying, they would just go away for a while because we're lost in these wholesome things. I pray this morning, whatever you heard, whatever stuck to your heart, I hope you'll commit in your heart and God would help you to do it for the person you thought of at the beginning of the sermon. One person. You don't have to tell them. That's our thought today. I pray it would be a help to you. You could probably tell it was encouraging me to read this, really. Like, it really encouraged me to just read the type of friend that Paul was. And it makes me want to be more like it, and it makes me want to have friends like that. And I pray this morning it would be an encouragement to you. Somebody have a word before we dismiss today?